So you're the record company, you're the artist, you're the A&R person, you're the VP, you're the producer, you're the recording engineer, you're the assistant because you're operating the transport yourself. You're the technical guy. You're doing all of that stuff. You apparently you are a percussionist. You are a keyboard player. You're a guitar player. You're a background vocalist. You're a vocal producer. You're an arranger. Then you're a mix engineer, and then you're a mastering engineer. Okay, here we go. This is. I hope my audio works the entire time because this is going to be an unbelievable, riveting episode. It's been about a week. The week got away from me somehow. I don't even know what the hell is going on. And now it's cold and rainy on a Wednesday night, and I'm ready to go. This one is going to be for the artists, particularly new artists, and some of my recording industry friends, to say the least, and who else? I don't know. I get this probably more times than I care to think about, but people ask me, what's happening with music? Why is there no good music? What the hell happened to music? Is there ever gonna be another Rolling Stones or Led Zeppelin, or, I mean, for that matter, will there ever be another Nirvana? Will there ever be another Oasis or something like that? If you consider them in that category. I kind of do. Who knows? There'll be some here and there, I think. But I have my little chart of stuff I wanted to cover with this. And this kind of comes up... it comes up regularly when I talk to, in particular, new artists. And here's the setup to the whole thing with most new artists these days, is that they have never experienced the recording industry that they want to be in at this point. And I'll probably go in circles a little bit. I think that there's some revelations in there if you can hang in there. I will just start by I'll try and describe to you briefly what it took artists to get through, to break through. So the barrier to entry back not long ago, and if someone says the cliched, this is the old guy yelling at the clouds thing, I mean, go F yourself. Because, I think that is one of those tropes that is used to try and blow off someone actually telling them the painful truth. So if it's something they don't want to hear, they'll say, this guy's just angry, or he's just... I'm not angry, I can care less. Or could not care less. Let me just try and describe to you some of the things. I'm going to compare some things different from not long ago to now. So, say you're an artist, and I'm going to just go with artist. I'm not going to talk about you're a band or whatever. Let's just assume an artist needed a band not long ago, if we're going to talk in those terms. So the band and the artist would be playing gigs and rehearsing in their rehearsal studio or room or garage or basement, and then go about doing gigs and try and look for an opportunity to get the interest of a record label. And I'm going to go real fast on this, as fast as I can. So let's just say the artist gets the attention of the proverbial A&R guy who happens to be at the bar, or he's heard a buzz around town that there's a hot new act and he's got to go check it out. So he's at the bar, the band does their set, and after the set he says to the band or whoever the leader is, Now, I doubt if they have a manager by this time, but it's possible. But let's just say they don't. The A&R guy will approach the band and say, hey, kids, what do you think about signing up for a record deal? You know, I think I might want you guys to be on our label. What would that entail, sort of, typically back then? It would entail maybe doing another couple of shows for other people of the label to see them, for other people from the label that would want to voice their opinions on whether they think they could do something with this act. Let's see, can they draw crowds more than just the one night that we saw them? Or can they at least capture the crowd that's there? Even if they're not packing the place, can they keep the attention of the people who are there and the room's not clearing out? So anyway, now you're into the stages of the label people circling around saying like, hey, we're interested. Let's just jump to it and say they decide to offer this band a record deal. At times it used to be just a development deal where you would then go into the studio with a producer of choice, usually by the record label's choice, and you would cut 6 songs or a few songs, and then the label would get a feel for whether you were signable. Because signing you is a major investment. I know that like people like to talk about, oh, the labels ripped off artists or whatever, but the labels, you know, the labels can make a lot of money, but they lost a lot of money on artists that completely tanked, went belly up, dropped dead before they even put their record out, went into rehab and were there was an unworkable situation, all those types of things. So anyway, let's just say you get past the development project stage and you get a record deal. Then the artist would have to pick a producer. Typically, they weren't producing themselves, which is going to relate to what's going on now. They weren't producing themselves. So they would find the A&R and the label and maybe even the VP of the label, they would get involved and they would be looking for the producer that they wanted to do this project. And you find the producer. And then the producer would say like, hey, I like really working in this studio. Let's just say I really like working at the power station and that's where I want to do this record. So boom, the band would then be going into the studio with a record producer and a recording engineer, because typically, not like today, the producer was the producer, the recording engineer was a specialist who his gig was to record everything, capture everything. He was complete, and I'm going to say he all the time because it's just more convenient. Sorry. He was more of an absolute one-trick pony, recording engineer. But that trick was very well done and quite refined. The producer was not a recording engineer, didn't operate Pro Tools, didn't program. All he was there for was an interface with the band to try and groom the material, to make sure the arrangements were cool, the parts, the performances. He didn't even have to think about the recording because the recording engineer was handling that with his at least one, maybe if not 2 assistant engineers. And sometimes the recording engineer, this is how specialized things were, the recording engineer would be the guy who picks the microphones, does the microphone placement, EQs things at the board, sets levels and things like that. But the assistant engineer was quite possibly the tape operator. The tape op. There were recording engineers not long ago, if I want to say not long ago, but that didn't run tape. They didn't run the deck. That was specifically for the up-and-coming engineer who was a tape op, whose laser focus was just recording, finding where they wanted to get in and out on recording, knowing where he was within the song, and just operating that machine, the remote for the tape deck. And it was specifically tape at this point. So there you have the A&R, the VP of the label, maybe even the president of the label, the producer working with the artist, the recording engineer, the assistant engineers who are like tape operators and making sure everything's all set up properly and all ready to go for when the artists are going to be recording. And the recording engineer was not producing. He would be interacting with the producer when the producer would suggest what he needed, but no production from that recording engineer. Then we can get even further. There was a technical staff that would be making sure that the console was operating properly, that the speakers, the monitors, the studio monitors were tuned properly. They were set up. They had fresh speakers in them. There were no blown tweeters. The machines were aligned and properly maintained and operating at peak efficiency. The microphones were taken care of and tested regularly to make sure that there was no problems with it. If you had a problem with the microphone, you would send it off to the tech at the studio and he would test it and find out if there was something wrong, like if something needed to be cleaned or if there was a connection that had come loose because somebody had dropped it or something like that. So there's more people involved. Then on the art side of things, not only was there the artist and or the band that was with this production, there were other specialists that would be brought in. There were, at times, background vocalists. Bring in the background vocals. We're going to do background vocals with, guess what? People that only do background vocals. We're going to bring in a string arranger for a guy who just arranges strings, because we're going to record strings tomorrow, and this guy did the arrangement, and that's all he does. You can only imagine. Maybe you might want a percussion player. You would bring in one of the hotshot famous percussion players to play percussion on your record. These were all things that someone like Paul Simon would do. Now, Paul Simon was producing himself going back a ways, but he had a recording engineer, he had his band, he had all the technicians and other people that I mentioned from the studio, like the tape op / assistant engineer. He would bring in a percussion player who literally, it was like, hey, we're doing percussion today. We're bringing in a guy who makes a living playing percussion. That's all he does. I'm trying to remember one of the famous guys' names. It'll come to me. This guy used to have a van show up that was from Carthage, and the 20 road cases would be dropped into the studio with every piece of percussion known to man. And then he would play all kinds of parts so that the producer could decide, oh yeah, that's cool, this is cool, that's cool. It wasn't like the producer programming the percussion. It was a real percussionist. Anyway, if you can only picture that as to what was involved in making these classic records that people still listen to 40, 50 years later and marvel at them and say, wow, that's incredible. Are we going to ever get another, Paul Simon? Are we ever going to get another Fleetwood Mac or any other classic rock or classic legendary act Think about it. Now what's expected, or artists expect of themselves, is that they are, they have a laptop, and they have Pro Tools, and they have something like Splice, which is, to pull in samples of other things, performances of other instruments. They have Melodyne, they have all these little tools, and yet there's no barrier stopping them, or at least there's no opportunity in a lot of ways for them to have this incredible collaboration that there used to be of specialists. Now it's one person in a room making bedroom pop, wondering why they can't compete with something along the lines of these legendary things. Like, even if you go back to rock records from the 80s and 90s, they had all of these specialists involved. The specialists kind of died a horrible death somewhere around, I would say, 2004 or 5, when the machine, the Pro Tools rig, let's just call it that, became the tape deck, became the production center, and then people who had never experienced all of the things that I just talked about started producing records, and they had no background as to where the things came from that they were trying to create. It would be like getting an entire setup of oil paints and a canvas and having no idea what was involved in the beginnings of being an artist, or what if you're trying to copy some master works. I'm kind of going off on a tangent there. It's just real hard to describe to someone, especially when they're asking you, why can't they get their stuff to sound great? Why are they not as good as Prince? Why are they not as good as Radiohead or Coldplay? Why doesn't their stuff sound that way? It's not only because they have never worked with all these specialists, it's that they don't even understand what the specialists used to do. And I'm going to cut it at that, because this is probably a long part 1 to this specialist rant. I'm going to call it the specialist rant, and maybe at some point I'll do a continuation of this. And as to how I can, I don't think there's no hope and there's no light at the end of the tunnel. And I do think that there's always outliers who can pull off being the artist, producer, engineer, mixer, and mastering engineer all in one person. That person, without having any of the background going back to where they saw or had the experience of being, I'll just say it. If you were never an assistant engineer that became an engineer, that became a mix engineer, that became a producer, that worked with hundreds of people, you have nothing to relate to with regards to how it is you're trying to go about being the all-in-one Swiss Army knife artist, producer. Let me say, artist, producer. You're not only that, you're your own A&R, because there's no barrier to entry. You can literally upload through DistroKid to Spotify without anybody saying no. So you're the record company, you're the artist, you're the A&R person, you're the VP, you're the producer, you're the recording engineer, you're the assistant, because you're operating the transport yourself. You're the technical guy. You're doing all of that stuff. Apparently you are a percussionist. You are a keyboard player. You're a guitar player. You're a background vocalist. You're a vocal producer. You're an arranger. Then you're a mix engineer, and then you're a mastering engineer.